The river took him so fast he barely had time to understand that Kevin was gone. 1 second the raft was still fighting the Tweechie, slamming sideways through white water and spinning toward a section of river both men had already feared. The next, Yossi Ghinsberg was in the current alone, smashed against debris, dragged downstream, and carried toward a waterfall he could hear but could not see. When he finally reached shore, bruised, soaked, and half wild with panic, the jungle did not feel like adventure anymore. It felt like the exact place where a man could disappear and never be found. He was 21 years old, deep in the Bolivian Amazon in 1981, and for the first time since the trip began, the fantasy had burned away. There was only forest, water, injury, and the growing knowledge that nobody knew where he was. Ginsberg had come to South America chasing the kind of experience that ruins ordinary life for a while. After service in the Israeli Navy and months of wandering, he reached La Paz and met two other young travelers, Swiss schoolteacher Marcus Stam and American photographer Kevin Gale. In Bolivia, they also met Karl Ruprechter, an Austrian who presented himself as an experienced guide and prospector. Karl claimed to know a route into the jungle where there was gold, untouched wilderness, and an indigenous village few outsiders had seen. Ginsberg wanted exactly that kind of journey. He and Marcus trusted Karl. Kevin joined too, though he had doubts earlier than the others. The four men flew to the Bolivian interior, moved toward the Tweechie River region, bought supplies, and then left the last ordinary settlement behind. They agreed they would make their way through the forest and regroup in La Paz before Christmas. The trip went wrong before Ginsberg was ever alone. The jungle was harsher than Karl had promised. Progress was slow. Food ran low. Feet broke down. Marcus suffered badly, and tempers frayed. Kevin increasingly distrusted Karl and wanted out. The party split in two. Karl and Marcus would try to walk back out. Yossi and Kevin would build a raft and head downriver, believing the current would carry them toward inhabited country faster than marching through the forest. It was a gamble made by tired young men in a place that punished bad judgment immediately. As they floated the river, the water grew more violent. Then the raft spun out of control near a dangerous section. Kevin made it to shore. Yossi was carried downstream alone. He later said he spent 4 days trying to work his way back upriver to find Kevin before finally accepting that he was stranded by himself in the jungle. Once he understood he was alone, the real ordeal began. He still had a lighter, mosquito net, and a little rice, but the Amazon consumed strength faster than supplies could last. Every step hurt. The ground itself could not be trusted. Trails vanished into mud. Vegetation blocked sightlines. Riverbanks collapsed underfoot. Rain soaked everything until clothing, skin, and gear all seemed permanently wet. In daylight, he pushed forward because stopping meant surrendering to fear. At night, he built small camps, wrapped himself as best he could, and listened to the jungle come alive around him. Insects got into everything. The dark never felt empty. Every sound suggested teeth, venom, or movement in the brush. Ginsberg later described one night when army ants swarmed over him inside the mosquito net and tore at his skin until he fought them off in panic. He also described killing a snake that had slid into his shelter. Alone, injured, and exhausted, he was living minute to minute instead of by any real plan. Hunger altered the way he thought. He scavenged whatever he could find and tried to stretch what remained of his supplies, but there were long stretches when food was almost non-existent. Water was everywhere, yet safety was nowhere. He had to cross streams and slog through low ground while his feet softened, split, and began to rot from constant moisture and infection. Later accounts described fungal damage and trench foot-like deterioration. The pain made walking feel unnatural, then nearly impossible. Still, he kept moving because the other choice was to sit down in a place where rescue was not expected, and death could arrive slowly. Ginsberg has said that one of the worst parts was the understanding that no one was coming by accident. There was no passing hunter he could count on, no map that could reliably take him out. If he survived, he would survive because he kept himself alive long enough for some impossible break to happen. The jungle also attacked his mind. Days alone in pain stripped away ordinary thinking. He later said that despair came in waves strong enough to feel physical. At his lowest points, he lay in the mud and imagined simply staying there. Then another thought would take over. If he stopped moving, this place would close over him and no one would ever know what had happened. He began talking to himself. In some accounts, he described hallucinating a woman beside him at night, a presence his mind seemed to invent against total isolation. Whether the details shifted in memory over time or not, the larger truth did not. Solitude in that environment was not reflective. It was disorienting, hostile, and slowly degrading. The forest narrowed his world to pain, fear, and the next practical task. Make fire, protect the feet, keep the river in mind. Do not let despair decide the day. At one point, the ordeal nearly ended in water rather than starvation. Flooding swept through the area, turning ground he had already crossed into a trap. Ghinsberg later recounted being caught in rising water, and at another point, sinking into a bog twice, struggling to pull himself free while the mud seemed determined to keep him. The jungle did not need a single dramatic moment to kill him. It could do it by soaking him, slowing him, infecting him, starving him, and then taking him when he was too weak to fight back. By the second and third weeks, his strength was gone. He had lost weight, his feet were badly damaged, and hope had become erratic. Yet he made a decision that probably saved him. He kept orienting himself back toward the river. However dangerous it was, the river was still the only realistic route to other human beings. What Ghinsberg did not know was that Kevin Gale had gotten out and refused to accept that he was dead. Kevin reached people, found help, and convinced a local riverman named Abelardo Tico Tudela to go back into the jungle to search for him. That mattered because after 3 weeks alone, Ghinsberg was very close to the point where intention no longer meant much. But while he was dragging himself along the river, Kevin and Tico were moving through the same country looking for a sign that he was still alive. According to the surviving accounts, they found him on the river 3 days into the search, roughly 3 weeks after he had first been lost. The rescue arrived as 2 men in a boat after the jungle had reduced his world to the point where hope itself felt almost unreal. The emotional violence of the story did not end the moment he was pulled from the jungle. Marcus Stamm and Karl Ruprechter never came back. Multiple searches failed to find them, and they were eventually presumed dead. That meant Ghinsberg's survival story was tied forever to loss and uncertainty. He spent months recovering physically. Later, he turned the ordeal into the memoir Back from Tweetchee, published under other titles, including Jungle, and the story eventually reached a global audience. But the reason it still grips people is simpler than that. A young traveler made a reckless decision in a place he did not understand, was left alone with injury and terror, and lived only because he kept moving through conditions that should have erased him. What made the Amazon so horrifying was not only that it could kill him, it was that it could do it without witnesses and without leaving much behind. Ghinsberg was not fighting a single enemy he could see and beat. He was fighting confusion, infection, hunger, exposure, isolation, and the creeping temptation to stop. He did not know if anyone was searching. He did not know if Kevin had survived. He did not know if he was walking toward rescue or deeper into nowhere. For 3 weeks, the difference between life and death came down to whether he could keep his body and mind moving one more day, then one more night, then one more morning, in a forest that had no reason to spare him. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.